While we're waiting, if participants want to let us know where you're attending from today, it's always nice to see which corners of the province or country or world you're attending from, especially with the amount of participants or the amount of registrants we had for this webinar. It was a record by far, so it would be really great to see where you're all joining from.
Sorry about that. Okay, it's 2 o'clock now. We do have a jam-packed webinar today for you, so I want to start right on time. Welcome to the Transitioning ESL Learners to LBS webinar. This is the final webinar in the pop-up PD series for this fiscal year. So, my name is Heather ROBINET. I'm the Executive Director of the QUILL Learning Network, which serves Huron, Perth, Bruce Grey, and South Georgian Bay. QUILL is the lead network on this deliverable, this pop-up PD deliverable. So this, I've been involved in literacy for 25 plus years, 25 of them with the Avon Maitland District School Board, and the last 3 with the QUILL Learning Network. Okay, so before we start the presentation, I'll do a statement of recognition or acknowledgement. While we meet today on a virtual platform, let's take a moment to recognize, respect, and acknowledge the importance of the lands we occupy and from which we benefit. Today, let's reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improve relationships between nations and our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Let's remind ourselves that wherever we are, we live on the ancestral and unceded territory of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people. Okay, so just a bit about pop-up PD for literacy educators. These are a free webinar series developed by a committee of the regional network and provincial support orgs for literacy. They are intended to support LBS practitioners by providing presentations on topics that are important to the field. English language webinars presented for LBS practitioners have happened annually since 2015, and all webinar presentations, recording links, and transcripts can be found on the Contact North site under pop-up PD resources for LBS educators. You can also access them from the Learning Network of Ontario website by clicking on resources. So if you ever have any ideas for webinar topics, please do feel free to share them with us by emailing the address on your screen now. Okay, so the other little bit before we start. As I said, it's going to be a jam-packed presentation today. So in the interest of saving some time and making sure we get through those presentations, we will be doing our question and answer section at the end of the presentations. However, if you have questions that you want to put into the chat as we go along, then there is also the possibility that those presenters to whom those are directed would be able to answer them in the chat as we go along. So please consider both ways. Okay. So the sorry, got a frog all of a sudden. This presentation came about basically because of a research project that was done in 2022-23 by 3 literacy networks who were interested in and seeing what was happening with ESL learners. We were getting a lot of feedback from programs that were saying that they were getting inundated with language learners coming into LBS programs. And the largest impact seemed to be to rural LBS programs. So based on that, we looked into, we did a lot of research into who was providing LBS service to ESL learners, and we analyzed data and came up with some recommendations and some insight into what rural areas in particular, but also some of the larger centers where language learning programs had waiting lists about what they were doing to kind of fill the gap in training for English language learners. We were discovering that there just was not enough language training available. So we received data from 31 agencies who were serving ESL learners and 21 agencies who would if they felt they could. And part of the reason why they felt they couldn't was because of their interpretation of the LBS guidelines requirement for CLB 6 for service to language learners in LBS classrooms. That's just a real brief summary of what prompted this webinar. During that research, we discovered that some programs were doing some pretty innovative training and to accommodate language learners. And we thought it would be a good opportunity to present what some of those are to the broader LBS field, because I'm sure this is an issue across the province, not just in 1 or 2 areas. Okay. Right. So first up for our panel of presenters is Sue Damon, and Sue Damon has served as program coordinator for the literacy group since 2009. Before that, she volunteered with ELLs, or English language learners, in the rural program for about 4 years. She is responsible for learner registration, assessment, learner plan development, and placement. She also does a fair amount of teaching of both ELLs and LBS learners. So Sue, I'll turn this over to you at this point.
Thank you. I've got my timer going and I have a little bell. I told Heather when I need a slide changed, and I will try not to talk too fast. So you can change the slides, please. And I'm going to skip through this quickly. Basically, the CLB it was always a recommendation, nothing more than a recommendation that we accept only people with CLB 6. That has been removed, so that frees us up a little bit more for more flexibility as to who we take into the program. Next one, please. Okay, this is our, I'll just be really, because of time constraints, I'll try to condense what I say as much as possible. There's one section I want to focus on, so the things that are self-explanatory, I will leave to you to read. I understand you're all getting the slides after, and that way you can read those slides after because they're pretty self-explanatory. In our area, we've leaned heavily on receiving ability to receive instruction in English, except for our rural programs, which have always been an exception. We don't have any minimums with respect to CLB reading and writing, because in our area, where there are 4 LBS programs, we are niched to work with those at the lowest levels of literacy. So we take level 0 to 1 to whatever they are at with reading and writing, not with speaking, listening. Next, please. So I'm going to leave this to you. Basically, I'm saying that the demographics have changed. Population has exploded. I think we're number 3 in the country for growth rate right now in Waterloo region. And we've developed a lot of modular programs, some of which are more accessible to learners with lower speaking, listening levels. So we've been able to take in some of the lower CLB people with our modular programs. Next, please. This is where I want to focus most of my attention, because I think this is something that I've had to learn a lot about and taken a lot of webinars. So I'm hoping that what I've learned will be a benefit to some of you. Through using a new reading assessment tool, we have discovered that phonics is a weakness across the student population for us, whether they're ELL, which is English language learners, or native English speakers. Phonics is weak right across the board. So we've had a renewed emphasis on phonics with our learners. And one of the things that we've learned is that there's a limited benefit to decoding words that are not already in the oral vocabulary. It's still helpful. I work with many ELLs that are learning phonics, but that skill will only aid their comprehension once they know the meanings of the words that they're decoding. They can learn letter sound correlations, that's helpful, but it won't help their comprehension if they don't know the meanings of the words. For example, children who begin to learn to read at around age 5 typically come with 10,000 words about that, some more, some less, in their oral vocabularies. So that when they sound out a word like cat, they can link it to a word that they know through their oral vocabularies, and it has meaning for them. I have a non-ELL student who's English, native English speaker. I'm working with phonics with him, and he will sound out many words. He's very weak with phonics, but he's sounding them out, and he'll keep tweaking them until he arrives at a word that's part of his oral vocabulary. So for example, he might say cap, it, al, cap, it, tal. Oh, capital, that pesky schwa sound again. So he can tweak what he's decoding phonetically till it matches with his oral vocabulary. And because he knows the meanings of the words orally, it aids his comprehension. He knows the meaning of capital, so then he can understand better what he's reading. On the contrary, I have an ELL student who reads fluently. Her first language is Portuguese, where I'm guessing there's a lot of transfer between her native language and English as far as the phonetics. She reads very fluently, but her tutor told me she doesn't comprehend what she's reading. So I said, check the vocabulary. Sure enough, she could read fluently, decoding, but she did not understand the meanings of the words that she was reading. So the tutor had to kind of double down on vocabulary for her. That's an example of a difference between somebody who's a native English speaker and somebody who is an English language learner. Right now in schools, the buzzwords are the science of reading. It's all over the reading instruction field. And that's resulted in a much heavier emphasis on phonics with instruction, which is a really good thing, especially when it's compared with the discredited methods such as whole language and 3 cueing system. It's a much better approach, much more effective approach. But the caveat is that research is showing that the benefits of phonics instruction begin to wane by about grade 3 if that phonics instruction is not accompanied by instruction in oral language, vocabulary, and background knowledge. By grade 3, when the shift from learning to read to reading to learn happens, reading demands much more tier 2 vocabulary. We'll get to that in a minute. and background knowledge. So kids who are fluently decoding Tier 1 words, but have deficiencies in the other areas start to fall behind. So ELL students who have little previous education are typically deficient in oral language, vocabulary, and background knowledge. The first two, oral language and vocabulary, can best be addressed in ESL or ELL programs. So next, reading comprehension, the importance of vocabulary for reading comprehension. In the field of vocabulary development, we talk about Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 words. Tier 1 words being the language of everyday conversation, words like cereal and warm and dog and tired. Tier 2 words being the words that typically appear in print materials and used in the classroom. Those are words like contradict, precede, fervent, commotion. So they're words that have application across academic domains, history, science, etc. Tier 3 words are highly specialized words specific to one domain, like photosynthesis or epidermis or filibuster. So in the ELL programs, they typically focus on Tier 1 words, the words that people would use in everyday conversation. Without solid Tier 1 vocabulary, because LBS programs tend to focus more on Tier 2 words, people that don't have that foundational Tier 1 vocabulary have a really hard time understanding materials and resources in the LBS classroom. Just as an example here, I have a student who's ELL, and we came across the word, I was working with her, we came across the word wept, and she says, "What means wept?" So you can see we have some work to do on English syntax for questions, but anyway, I was able to say it means cried. Because she had the Tier 1 word cried, she could easily understand the meaning of wept. And then because she has an understanding of English verb conjugation, I could relate it to sleep, slept, keep, kept, weep, wept. So Tier 1 words provide the scaffolding that new knowledge needs to attach to be able to make it stick. We need prior knowledge to make new knowledge stick. Another thing that's really important to know is that research has shown that we need to understand 98% of the words we read in order to comprehend. That's pretty startling, but I attended a webinar where they demonstrated exactly that to us, 98%. So if your ELL learners don't have that foundational vocabulary, it's very hard for them to participate in an LBS classroom. Remember that in the ESL classroom, simple vocabulary, simple language structure. The other people in the class are using easier words, easier sentence structure. So they're able to function in that. But if they get into an LBS classroom, that may not be the case. The same thing with writing. Things like vocabulary, syntax, grammar, usage, those are the building blocks for writing. If they don't have those building blocks, it's really hard for them to work on writing. For example, I was working with a student on combining sentences because she understood the meanings of and, but, so, because, although, since. I was able to teach her how to connect sentences and what the different connections meant logically. And she understands and uses subordinate clauses in her oral speech, so she's able to transfer that knowledge to her writing. I once made the mistake years ago of accepting a very low speaking listening CLB learner for math, and her tutor quickly complained to me that she was spending all her time explaining basic vocabulary to this woman, equals, greater than, less than, and so on. So that's really important that they have the foundational Tier 1 words to be able to function in LBS classrooms. Yes. Also, yeah, just being able to talk with other classmates in their class, being able to keep up with their classmates, those things are all really important. The oral language skills, which they focus on in the ESL programs, are really important. So in short, oral language skills are required to effectively receive instruction in English in an LBS classroom. Next slide, please. I wanted to highlight a difference. This is, I actually did a snapshot of a work that I was doing last week in a ELL program, English Language Learner programs in St. Jacobs. I just wanted to use this to highlight some of the differences between LBS and ESL teaching. You can see that the teacher, who is a very experienced ELL, ESL teacher, and has taught many years in the LINK program, you can see what she's working on with them. Sentence, how do you express and answer a question in English? Did you hear about the pigs in Saskatchewan? No, I didn't. We don't have to teach LBS learners how to answer a question. You can see that she underlined TH to show the different, to teach them pronunciation of the TH sound. You can see that she circled chew to teach them word stress in a sentence. There are too many pigs and they are dangerous. You can see that she broke the words into syllables to teach them pronunciation, because typically ESL students have a hard time with multi-syllable words. You can see that she was teaching reduction. We don't say did you, we say did you. Those are the things we don't have to teach. We sometimes have to teach the opposite so that they write not I want to be, but I want to be. But in ESL programs, these are the kinds of things they focus on that we don't do in LBS. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can read about this on your own. We can go on to the next slide, please. This is a picture of our St. Jacobs program, the women from the Low German Mennonite community. Next, please. Okay, this again, you can read about our program in St. Jacobs. I won't belabor this. It's something that you can read on your own. Next slide, please. This is about our change in policy. We no longer register these students because of transients in the community and because of issues related to attendance, because they have lots of children and they have all kinds of related issues to that. So we now treat it as community outreach. We only register them if they are clearly able to make a long-term study commitment to coming. And if if they have the CLB 6 for speaking listening. All we do is provide the instructors right now. Everything is provided, also provided by Woolwich Community Services. Next, please. Okay, so I'll try to be really brief here. When we accept people to we have many ELL learners who want to come to our program. They want to be in a class with native English speakers, because in the ESL program, all they hear is other people who are weak in English, and they want the experience of learning with people who have English as their native language. We assess either through formal language assessment or things like how long they've lived in Canada, their education and employment history. Those things can be very telling as to whether they're ready for the oral, they have the oral language skills to be able to participate effectively in an LBS classroom. We sometimes use some of our modular programs as a test ground for a core program readiness. If they can handle that program, then we can look at putting them into our core programs. So we have some programs some students who are in both ESL and our program. For example, they're getting oral language in the ESL program. They're working on one-to-one writing instruction with us because they can't get that in the ESL program. Next. So these all I've provided links to most of the resources that we use in our rural program, which is ESL, and in our Kitchener program, which we work with, what we use with the ELLs in our Kitchener program. You can check them out by yourself. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to have you contact me. We're discovering the beauty of Lubbock way to reading now that we're working more in person with people. It's an excellent phonics program that works really well with ELLs as well as with our native English speakers. So if you have any questions, please contact me and I'd be happy to Zoom with you and walk you through the resources. If you have any program information, please contact my colleague, Lisa MacArthur, and she can tell you about how we made decisions about programming for the ELLs. And that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Just a reminder, presenters, to enable your camera when you are about to do your presentation. That way we can see who's talking. Okay, so the next presenter is Erin Kunanen. And Erin is newer to the LBS field, having been a practitioner for only 6 years. For the past 2 years, she has also worked part-time as a program advisor for the Skills Upgrading and Readiness Program of the Avon-Maitland District School Board. Erin is a very outside of the box thinker and has been instrumental in forging some unique training partnerships with community partners and employers in Huron and Perth counties, and also for developing some innovative programming for a wide variety of learners. So Erin, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Heather. Can everybody hear me okay? So like Heather mentioned, my name is Erin Pakanainen, and I am the LBS program advisor for the classroom program in Huron County and North Perth, which is specifically in Listowel. We are part of the school board, so we are the school board sector, and we have 6 classroom locations in Clinton, Goderich, Exeter, Seaforth, Listowel, and Wingham. Those are particularly in Huron County, and they're at the Centers for Employment and Learning. And then our location in North Perth is in Listowel. So next slide, please. So our classroom currently offers in-person and hybrid service delivery throughout Huron County and North Perth. So for those of you who are not as familiar with this area, it is quite rural. Historically, our delivery method was in person only. However, COVID sort of forced us to pivot. Although COVID really negatively impacted people who were accessing our services, it forced us to sort of think outside the box in terms of service delivery options. So we now recognize the benefit of offering flexible service delivery models. And although our preferred model is still in person, we can certainly attest to the positive impact a hybrid model has had on our program, especially when working with certain groups like caregivers, employed, newcomers, and immigrants. So we created a hybrid model. When we did create this, we also improved our registration process by creating a digital consent form and assessment tool. Practitioners were really able to reach potential learners at a time that was convenient for them. And so this alone removed some of the barriers that adults face, especially if they're employed or if they are a caregiver. And it helped create a more efficient registration process. And this became especially useful when delivering group training. Next slide. So in Huron County, there are very limited in-person ESL classes. Most in-person classes are hosted in Perth, which is mostly outside of our program's region. We do have a classroom in Listowel. We did at one time have ESL in-person classes in Clinton and Goderich. However, in-person classes, due to our area as well, they often rely on numbers in order to operate. And with our geographical area being so rural, it really presents the problem of a smaller learner pool. Our participant pool. So our classrooms in Huron County we're definitely seeing, and we continue to see quite a gap between higher level ESL learners who need literacy and LBS support, but also who still need ESL programming support to find gainful, sustainable employment or to pursue education within Ontario. So this kind of led me to dig a bit deeper into how we could support this group. We often find that ESL learners are determined and committed to their upgrading initially, but the urgency to meet basic needs like working kids, it becomes their focus, and rightfully so. So this naturally creates a barrier to accessing services throughout during regular classroom times, especially during the daytime and through the week. And all of our literacy classroom hours are through Monday to Friday from 9 until 4. So this made me think outside the box a little bit on how our program could increase accessibility to services without going outside of allotted hours and our tiny budget. Next slide. So I started looking at workplaces that didn't require an OSSD or a high school diploma or a language proficiency assessment and who had a higher percentage of immigrant staff. So this led me to sort of search for employers who were actively and urgently recruiting staff to fill multiple vacancies. And working together with employment services, I had ideas of where we could look. So in our community, fast food restaurants were among the many businesses struggling to stay open after the pandemic, and it was mainly due to staffing concerns. So restaurants like McDonald's and Tim Hortons in Huron County were particularly having a difficult time. So I learned that McDonald's in Huron and Perth County recruited staff through a foreign workers program. So some of the challenges new staff experienced that were recruited through this program, they sort of struggled with working with Canadian currency and meeting some of the Canadian workplace expectations. So we met with McDonald's management and their outreach team a few times to discuss some of the skill gaps they identified when hiring workers through this program. And Canadian workplace expectation and skills and Canadian currency were consistently brought up. So we decided to approach McDonald's to pilot integrating our literacy support using Canadian currency prior to on the floor workplace training. So this eliminated that extra step of having staff upgrade their skills with us after working hours or having to provide their upgrading or prioritize their upgrading while prioritizing other things. So we created a digitized skills assessment, which assessed their numeracy skills as well as using Canadian currency and their reading and writing skills. Information about our program and this pilot was included in the welcome package for new hires through this program. Once they were officially hired and situated in their residence in Ontario. And if staff wanted to participate in literacy training prior to workplace training, we sent them the link to the assessment. And prior to their first day of workplace training, McDonald's would coordinate bringing their staff to our LBS classroom for up to a 3-hour Canadian currency customer service skills training session, and just to help build that confidence before they get on that floor. So we also had the ability to share additional information about the program and how we could support other skills. So this pilot was a great way for us to bring awareness to our services to employers and staff, which ultimately sort of helps spread awareness to our community and additional employers and community partners. It was a great way to demonstrate how our program can help promote staff retention, which has and is a continuous struggle for businesses in our area. But it also demonstrated how we can support those higher level ESL learners in a way that it's to sort of bridge that gap. They still require ESL training or ESL programming. They would still benefit from it, but it's that gap between too high for ESL, just at the lowest or at a low end of LBS. And so at that time we were working with CLB 6 or higher. Now that's been removed, which is good. But at that time they met that criteria. So that's why I targeted sort of restaurants that had those type of ESL learners. So I just for time's sake, I don't know if Heather, you can share the assessment. Otherwise, I can maybe put it in the chat afterwards. It's just, I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what that digital assessment looked like, the areas or the skills that we did assess. But for time's sake, I think we'll just, what do you think is best, Heather? Do you want me to move on and put the assessment in the chat so that they can see it on their own time? Or would you prefer me to demonstrate it now?
If you, well, I can stop sharing. You can pull it up quickly and go through it. I think everybody wants to see it, so.
Okay. Okay. Have to forgive me. I'm not super savvy, but I'm going to try. Okay. So let me just screen share here. And everybody can see this?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what they would see, each participant would see on their end. So they have to type in their name, and I'm going to have to do this as I go through it. So we ask them to write a sentence about themselves. So this will also help us identify any gaps in their writing skills. Next is a small sort of work-related task. It's a reading and writing task where they need to read an email and then respond to the email and put retract certain information, certain important pieces of information, and they have to respond to it. So I'll just put some
Erin, I
test.
don't know if you saw Stacy's comment in the chat, but she says she'll be able to add this in later, so everybody has access.
Okay, great. So again, just to briefly write the numbers in words, so the value of numbers. So instead of the number 5, they would write the word 5. Then it goes to sort of skip counting 2, 4, 6, 8. And then because this is all relevant to a position at McDonald's, if they're working at the cash, I know that they do work with a cash machine that will obviously do this for them, but it's just so that they have the basic, so we understand that they have the basic skills to be confident on in the workplace. So it's just skip counting by different values. And then to identify the value of each Canadian coin. And then dollar bill. And then sort of a self-reflection, I can count change up to $1 and then all the way up to $50. And then if there's anything that they feel confident about, they can say feel confident or want to learn. So I'm familiar with rounding up and rounding down. This may be new to them, I don't know. So we plug this in, and most said want to learn. So we identified those pieces in the assessment that was common. Again, rounding up and rounding down, so we get to see them practice it. If they selected I feel confident, then we want them to demonstrate that they are confident and they do have that skill. So now they need to practice just adding up all of these coins and bills to get the correct total. And then if you want to buy a meal that costs $12.70, they click on the buttons beside the bills and the coins to create the proper amount. And again, if your groceries cost $15.80, you select the bills. That's the best option. That gives you the correct amount to cover that total. Then it's basic adding and subtracting. It's not onerous. It's just 1 or 2 questions. And then again, a customer gives you a $10 bill for an order that's $7.30. So you need to make the correct change. And it's the same in this question as well, but using a little bit of a higher value. And then that's the end of the assessment. So when that participant completes the assessment, it's redirected to me. And I, or the practitioner, whatever site, it usually will get redirected to me. And then I forward it to the appropriate practitioner. Okay. I don't know, Heather, do you want me to answer some of these questions, or do we want to wait until after?
I can't see the questions, so if you feel you can answer them quickly and then move on with your presentation, go for it.
I will answer them afterwards, just because there's a few pieces of information that I'll need to include with each of those answers. So for time's sake, I think, and I'll just continue on with the presentation. And then afterwards, I'll address those questions individually. Okay. So what we found successful, just give me a quick second here. So most people were really eager to engage in skills training, any opportunity to really work with an instructor and build those communication skills, reading and writing skills. anything that will help them feel confident, especially in the workplace. We found we had almost 100%. Actually, we did have 100% participation rate. Everyone was super eager to register. And it was on paid time, which removed a huge barrier for a lot of adults wanting to access services, especially those who are employed full-time. We had very positive feedback from both parties, both staff and employer. All the services were delivered during regular classroom hours, so we didn't require additional staff or funding to provide these services, which was super because most of you know we do sometimes some of the programs, LBS programs, smaller ones definitely have a smaller budget. And because they were higher level learners, we didn't overlap or interfere with existing ESL programming. So at that time, when we piloted this, LBS was serving Canadian language benchmark 6+. So we were making sure the audience we were serving aligned with our program guidelines. So that was a plus. Next slide. Some of the challenges that we faced were that because they were higher level learners, it was harder for them to make relevant gains in a short period of time, enough to capture a milestone. We did assign a milestone because they did work through a number of skills and showed some gains, so we felt it was appropriate, but that would have been sort of a little bit of a challenge for us because some of the learners were able to, they knew the material right, but they just like right off the bat, but they wanted to participate in this opportunity. So there was a blend of relevant gains with some participant, and then some, it wasn't enough to warrant a milestone. There is always, as always, staff turnover, especially with McDonald's management staff and outreach staff, and it was really difficult to maintain partnership. So when there's in Perth and in Huron, there are a ton of McDonald's opening up. So businesses sometimes that have a lot of staff turnover. It's not just with entry-level staff, it can be with other staff as well as they move on to different positions. So maintaining partnerships was a little bit difficult because they were prioritizing other things. We didn't have a great percentage of learners that came back for additional upgrading. Our program, just because this was sort of the first time we identified that gap, really identified it. So our program wasn't quite as prepared with targeted content specific to this level of ESL learner that's seeking sort of new career opportunities or educational opportunities. But lastly, most of the staff didn't have many suitability indicators either. That was another challenge we found. They were employed, most had past high school education, even though it was outside of Canada. So we had to be really mindful of how this would impact our suitability measure if we were to continue this going forward. Next slide. So our next steps going forward now with having that experience, we know the benefit of integrating skills training into existing processes, such as workplace training. So we're going to use this experience to lean on when approaching other businesses or organizations who hire staff through similar programs or who have a higher percentage of ESL staff. This process also helped us identify that we need sort of more time-sensitive, targeted curriculum specific to ESL learners. We are currently working on creating some prep material for certain specific exams like CELPIP and TOEFL and Canadian workplace expectations, so that for newcomers or immigrants that are really trying to meet those basic needs in finding employment, they have a targeted curriculum that they can see a start to a finish. And you know, they have a sense of how they can fit that into to sort of meet the other needs that they have. So that is what those are some of our most important next steps. And now that the requirement for the CLB 6 has been removed, we're now in a position to increase opportunities for ESL learners needing support, which is great. But we're also mindful that we would love to partner more with ESL programming in our area because there definitely isn't enough. There's definitely gaps in those in-person classes. So we're hoping that we can collaborate more with the ESL programming and increase those training opportunities to support and bridge that gap that we often see between learners leaving one program and needing another. And we hope that this will ultimately increase that accessibility to services. Yeah, so that was my presentation. So yeah,
Thanks.
thanks,
Beth.
Heather. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so next up we have Nancy West. Nancy is new to Simcoe Muskoka Skillforce. She joined their team after 24 and a half years with the YMCA of Simcoe Muskoka. At the Y, she worked first in employment services as a team leader, and then in 2018 took on a new contract in LBS. Since then, she helped the Y to establish LBS contracts in Parry Sound and South Muskoka. She also started English as a second language courses in Huntsville in response to a growing presence of newcomers due to the Syrian refugee crisis. When she left the Y, successful ESL programs were running in Huntsville in Gravenhurst. I'll turn it over to you, Nancy.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. I have a picture of a dog with a hat because I feel like I'm wearing two hats. I am currently a program facilitator with Simcoe Muskoka Skillforce, but I am speaking from a YMCA perspective when I was still working there. So yes, so I am, just so that you don't get confused at what my role is moving forward. Next slide. Okay, so I just want to give you a bit of a timeline. Our situation is very different, I think, than a lot of people. We've been very fortunate to have third-party funding from Skoka Novel Marathon they raise money just for literacy and basic skills in the Huntsville region. They have been doing that since 2011 when we took over the contract in Huntsville for literacy and basic skills from Georgian College. And yeah, they were raising more and more money every year. So we were very fortunate to have this fundraiser. And we were putting that money toward our LBS program until 2016 in the Syrian refugee crisis. And they then approached us and said, would you consider offering ESL programming in Huntsville with these funds? And you have to understand that Huntsville, Muskoka, is a no man's land in terms of having services for newcomers, English as a second language, anything like that. Nobody claims us in their area of jurisdiction. And so there was really nothing there. And we were also approached by the community groups that were sponsoring the Syrian families. So we did start an ESL program. We hired an ESL instructor and just started going. They were all in-person programs at that time, and was just so much fun having them come through our doors, and all the newcomers were just such a blast to have intermixed with the other, our own staff and the other literacy learners in our classrooms. And I'll have the next slide, please. Okay, then COVID hit and classes abruptly stopped. In our case, students didn't want to keep going online. They wanted to wait until in-person classes again. And I think no one realized how long that would be. But those learners ended up doing other things and kind of dropped off the waiting list. And so we really didn't get going again for a while. And also the Muskoka Novel Marathon, our fundraiser, also stopped fundraising for a couple of years. So yeah, the world was on hold at that point. Next slide. Then when Ukrainian refugees started coming into the area, we realized we needed to act. There still was nothing substantial in our area whatsoever. And this time it was employers coming to us asking for help. We had a large manufacturer that had about 30 to 40 newcomers at various levels, Ukrainians and Mexicans and many other nationalities were intermixed as well. But yeah, it was because of COVID that employers were starting to draw in newcomers into their workforce because there were no local employees to fit the bill, and they needed bodies to fill vacant positions. We also had a construction company ask us for help. We had a nursery in terms of like plants, that kind of nursery. An aesthetics spa place also had a lot of newcomers. So yeah, they were coming to us. And the challenge was the Muskoka Novel Marathon was no longer raising the same amount of money as they used to, like a fraction of what they used to raise. And so it became obvious we needed more money. So we applied for skills development funding, but we were turned down even though our sister site in Parry Sound was approved. So that was disappointing for us. Next slide. So then we decided to put a huge effort into fundraising ourselves. The YMCA, of course, is a charity, so this is kind of like second nature for us. So we were getting out spin bicycles and we put them outside of our office. And during the fundraiser called Move to Give, we kept bicycles going for 6 hours, not letting them stop. And all the cyclists asked for donations, and we actually got some very big donations from employers as well. We ended up doing very well raising funds, and that helped to fund our ESL programming. While this Ukrainian war was going on, we also gained an LBS contract in South Muskoka. So now we had 2 different areas that required ESL funding. So that was also a challenge. Next slide. So yeah, over the 3 years we've held the fundraiser, the staff, we've done some cool things. Like we had learners jump on the bike. We had firefighters, police, ambulance drivers, mayors, deputy mayors, media representatives. They all jumped on the bikes with us, and inviting the mayors, deputy mayors, made sure that we got media representation to take photos and coverage of our event, and that was great. We raised thousands of dollars this way. Okay, next slide. So we've been really fortunate to have an incredible volunteer complement of ESL instructors, along with paid staff. And these staff, they do daytime programming, they do evening programming, they do in-person, they do online. We have an instructor as far away as Ottawa who's working with us because he's fully online, so it doesn't matter that he is not in our area. So we've been really having to think outside of the box to get the people that we needed to run these programs. And although Muskoka is in a no man's land in terms of settlement services, we were really, really fortunate. We begged and cajoled, and we got support from the Thunder Bay Multicultural Association to do English language assessments for our learners. So they did this Canadian language benchmark assessments for our learners. They had to be eligible. Not all were, but all Ukrainians were, that's for sure. And so we got all that testing done for free for them. And also we had the Welcome Center in Market come up and to our site a couple of times to meet with our ESL learners one-on-one to answer all their settlement questions. So that has been like a godsend for us because, like I said, we just didn't have anyone to turn to. So looking to the future, in the Muskoka district, municipalities are currently sending letters to the federal government. They are looking to get a local immigration partnership started in Muskoka so that we can start working toward getting settlement services and other supports in our region. I have some stats there for Muskoka, just showing the need for those kind of supports. Next slide. Oh, we missed a slide. One got missing. So what we did was how we integrated newcomers into our program is we used the method of English ESL students' vocabulary. So could they make themselves understood? And could they understand what we were saying? So it was the listening and speaking skills particularly that we went with. So would they be able to operate in an LBS classroom? Just, having those skills of being able to understand English and to be able to make themselves understood. Once they got to that level, we were able to move them into, or that's our benchmark for moving them into ESL programming, where they would continue to get English. Some wanted computer skills. Those were the main things that they were looking for in the time that I was there, is computer skills and more advanced English. So that's what we have been doing. That's it for my program.
Thanks, Nancy. And sorry about that missing slide. I was sure it was in there, but.
That's all right. I knew it was on it.
Okay. Next up, we have Ashley McGee. And Ashley has been working at the YMCA of Simcoe, Muskoka for over 10 years. In that time, she has held a variety of roles from youth and adult programming in their health, fitness, and aquatics department to data entry, job coach, youth employment specialist, and learning services workshop facilitator and program coordinator for the WISE Employment and Learning Services in Parry Sound. Over the last 8 years, Learning Services has always had a hold on Ashley, whether she is facilitating workshops or referring to the program from Employment Services. In the more recent 2 years as program coordinator, she has been navigating through ESL and been a key piece in integrating it into LBS programming. She is now stepping into the team leader of Learning Services role for Parry Sound, Huntsville, and South Muskoka, taking on the task of filling the shoes of our previous presenter, Nancy West. Okay, Ashley, over to you.
Thank you so much, Heather. I speak in the language of brief, so I might catch up on a bit of our time here, but if I ever speak too quickly, feel free to just let me know and I can slow down a little bit. Next slide, Heather, please. So just to give you a brief location history for those of you who aren't familiar with Parry Sound, I'm delivering the perspective of a new kids on the block when it comes to ESL programming. Parry Sound, Ontario, typical tourist town with a very small population size of 7,000. Traditionally, we are not very diverse as a location, and we have very minimal newcomer supports in our area. Our closest settlement services is a satellite site in North Bay that is run by the Thunder Bay Multicultural Center over 15 hours away. So you can understand that with the influx of the war in Ukraine and all of the newcomers coming into Ontario and Canada, how those resources quickly get stretched and you're kind of left on an island on your own. So we adapted as a community-minded organization of what can the YMCA provide to help fill that need. So in April 2022, the war in Ukraine sparked an influx of newcomers to our area, which traditionally didn't have a lot of newcomer traffic flow. If any, it was usually they bought up a business and they brought in their own family and they had their own support systems already set in place and they weren't walking through our doors to get that support. So in May 2022, our previous team leader in employment services did an express TEFL course in order to fill the need in our community as a volunteer basis and not through any current programming or funding model with the ministry. In July 2022, as many of you guys can probably echo, all of our services were stretched super thin, and we had over 100 newcomers arrive to our area, which again, I preface 100 probably is a flash in the pan for everyone else, but for a population size of 7,000 that's not used to newcomer traffic, that was astronomical for us and we weren't ready for that. So our volunteer efforts, as you can understand, were quickly overrun. Heather, next slide, please. So what happened next? A very quick phone call to MLITSD and asked if we could drop the need for CLB6 in our current LBS programming to allow us to take on ESL learners under our current LBS program funding. And I know we were very lucky and fortunate to have them say, yeah, sure, do it. So that was taken very graciously, and we were very fortunate to then, if the worlds could not, and the planets and the stars could not have aligned any faster, about a week later, we had someone walk through the door who was a 12-year veteran to delivering ESL classes, who was from Ukraine herself. So she spoke Ukrainian, Russian, as well as Mandarin, because she was teaching in China for the last 12 years. So that was very fortunate for us. A partnership was rekindled and reignited post-COVID with the Thunder Bay Multicultural Center to fill the need for that partnership for regular visits from a settlement worker, as well as to be able to access the language assessments that the newcomers needed in order to position themselves in order to be able to get their permanent residency in the future. Shortly thereafter, we started applying for a skills development fund. And as Nancy mentioned, we are also very fortunate and lucky to have our proposal granted. So that proposal targeted the higher levels of language support. So keeping those lower levels that were pre-CLB to CLB3 running currently under our LBS programs, and then skills development fund would service at that time was our underrepresented group, which was CLB 4 to 6, who were actively working and able to function in workplaces, albeit their language level was lower, who had the need for remote classes, online classes, after hours, and on weekends in order to accommodate their work schedule. So with the allowance for us to have skills development fund, we were able to hire 2 remote workers, so one out of London and one out of Hamilton, who are TEFL or TESOL trained in order to be able to serve those CLB levels after hours and on weekends, all solely online. Next slide, please, Heather. So what does ESL look like today with all those lucky horseshoes falling out of our back pockets? We have been able to hire 5 part-time ESL teachers that range anywhere from 2 hours a week to 10 hours a week. They're all TEFL or TESOL trained, either classically in their own experience or in a pinch as an express course to fill the need. Together, they're able to cover every single language level from pre-CLB to CLB6 as a class of their own, as opposed to grouping together introductory, intermediate, or advanced classes, and as well as test prep. So one of those teachers that we hired in that number 5 is able and qualified to do test prep as well. We organize them in teaching blocks of 2 months in length for 2 reasons. The obvious one is to fall in line with the milestone testing every 60 days. That allows us and gives us a certifiable time in order to bring them into the level of class that they're attending, and then to give them a milestone learning activities within that appropriate timeline. But also the teaching blocks were in response to that never-ending, everyone joins at all random times in the class. All the class is then starting from block number 1. We weren't seeing as much progression. We were seeing motivation fall off. So these teaching blocks allow us to lock participants in for 2 months, to have them fully committed and aware of the commitment that they're giving for those 2 months. And then be able to be tested to potentially graduate to a new class with maybe even a new instructor to reinvigorate that motivation, or have them, say in the summertime, be able to take that step back if they're focusing more on life stabilization factors like work, etc. Next slide, please, Heather. And I think that's it. So very much a New Kids on the Block perspective. All of this started in April of 2022. So thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Ashley. A reminder, if you have questions, you can put them into the chat, and hopefully they may get answered in there, or we'll have time at the end to address them. Our next presentation is from Fleming College. It is by Sandra Scott and Bruce Lindsay. Sandra has been with Fleming just under a year, managing their Employment Ontario programs. Prior to joining Fleming, was a senior manager in developmental services. He has done presentations and training at the local, provincial, and international levels on topics such as crisis case management, dual diagnosis, collaborative support with addiction services, forensics, dual diagnosis support, and risk reduction for case managers. Joining Fleming was a leap outside developmental services, but Sandra has enjoyed the challenge and is very thankful for the support from her colleagues and faculty. Bruce Lindsay is an ESL instructor attached to the Bridging Links to Achievement program currently being piloted at Fleming College. And we look forward to hearing what Sandra and Bruce have to share with us.
Hi, everyone. Bruce and I are going to tag team this presentation. I'm going to speak to more of systems and higher level organization, and Bruce is going to talk about the classroom interactions and things like that. Next slide. This is Bruce and I, but I can't, oh no, go back.
Oh, sorry.
Bruce and I are not the only two in this awesome group that deliver this program. We also have two faculty that support our sites, Tracy McDonald and Sarah Sherwin, who are very critical for this program, and we'll speak to them a little later on. Okay, now flip it. I just wanted to pay homage to the two instructors who couldn't make it with us today. So this program is offered originally as a collaboration between Fleming Skills on Demand, which is our academic upgrading program, and the language instructions for newcomers to Canada, the LINK program, which is offered at Fleming. Those two programs are actually housed in the same offices in two communities, Peterborough and Cobourg. So that really led to a natural development of this collaboration, because we actually work together in front-end services. And so we already had pre-existing relationships between the two different programs. The base of this program was taken from the strategies for college in the workplace curriculum, which was developed with support from CSCAU, which is actually the College Sector Committee for Academic Upgrading Skills for Success funding. So this was a short one-term funding that we received. Next slide, please. So what we were talking about in our existing in the same office space is we were being approached by the ESL students who are really eager to move on to either higher education at college or move on to work, but they really weren't skilled enough to really make that transition successfully. So when in development of this program, we really looked at the soft skills and the employment and educational skills that would make these individuals successful moving on from ESL to academic upgrading or post-secondary or even apprenticeship programs. Now, I do want to highlight here that this project was originally started under the leadership of Michael Andrews, and anyone who has been around in LBS for a while probably will recognize Michael's name. He was around with us for a long, long time. He's in BC now, but he created this program and then he left me. So we tried to honor his original spirit in this, and I hope we did well. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce.
Okay, I'm going to unmute myself and try to turn on the video, but it's, oh, I think I'm on. Okay. You can see the topic here. I thought I'd just go through some of the lessons so you can see what kind of we talk about. Multiple intelligences. Students, there's many different ways people learn.
Bruce.
And
Sorry, Bruce, I don't want to interrupt. I think the webcam is giving you internet connectivity issues. So maybe
okay.
if it's okay with you, just turn your webcam off and we'll see if that works.
Sure.
Much better already.
You hear me fine?
Yep.
So I was talking about SMART goals, time management, and learning strategies, teams, workplace culture, professional education, conflict in your work. Critical thinking.
Bruce,
Yes.
Bruce, sorry, you're really, your volume's not really working for some reason. Maybe I'll just keep talking, and I don't know what, you're just fading in and out, and I'm really worried about people missing content. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Heather?
Yes,
Do you
go
think that
ahead.
would be a good plan? Okay. So, sorry about that, Bruce.
No problem.
For the program, as Bruce was saying, we really tried to make it as relevant to the individuals going through the program and as applicable as possible. So Bruce was talking about SMART goals and making it very focused to the individuals coming through. With this program, Bruce and the facilitators kind of developed it as they worked through it. They didn't have like a curriculum set in stone, but they were very much flexible to what was happening in the classroom and how they delivered it. So looking at some of these key points, they twigged their lesson plans to hit these key areas, such as, communication skills, effective learning techniques, self-awareness, and personal growth. And looking at this too, you're also thinking of critical thinking, problem solving in the moment, navigating community resources, and career advancement strategies. Now, also things, one of these things that Bruce and the facilitators discovered too is looking at the cultural references people were coming from and how they played and how they handled, for lack of better terms, the Canadian way of doing things. So how some people see body language, how some people see eye contact in different cultures, as we know, varies. So it's then talking about that. So when they go into workplaces, they're aware of this difference and can then adjust or share their experiences or know how to communicate that. I wish Bruce could speak more. Bruce, put something in chat if I'm really missing something too. So that's very important, that critical thinking and that adapting. Next slide. So we had some program outcomes, but they had to adapt as the program went on. The e-portfolio, that seemed like a huge task undertaking. So instead of doing an e-portfolio, switching it to a LinkedIn profile or using LinkedIn as creating something as a tool for them for making connections, promoting themselves, looking for advancement things. Exactly. And the things that they wanted to focus on too, the SMART goals. Looking at education and career plans, what they really wanted to do after they finished this and how to do that and how to link their career and education plan using something like the LinkedIn profile or the resume that they were created. So it was really working. And, I can't speak highly enough of what Bruce and the facilitators, the faculty did. The curriculum, we actually are putting it into the package. So once the program's done, we're still in the process of delivering it. It actually finishes next week. So when it's done, Bruce and the other faculty members are going to put together a package we can then share, because we're not going to hoard this information. We want to be able to really share it with other providers, because playing in the sandbox is key for me. And I think we all as service providers do our community so much better when we're willing to share what we create. So that can be out there too. We'd be very happy to share that. Next slide. So the logistics, just to speak a little bit about it, this was offered was a weekly program offered for about 3 hours a week. We did do in class. This was not a hybrid model. We didn't actually even discuss this as a hybrid model, which is kind of odd because our LBS program is very much a hybrid model. But for this particular program, we really stuck with the in-person. Was offered at 2 different sites Peterborough and Coburg. Again, I spoke to those as both having the linked programs in there. So in each of these classes, we would have the skills on demand instructor, which is our LBS facilitator or academic upgrading faculty, and then Bruce as the qualified ESL faculty. So then they would do that. And then in that, we also had available one-on-one sessions for people who perhaps started a little late or they missed a day because something was happening. We didn't want people to fall behind. Next slide. The enrollment criteria, this would now change a little bit with the LBS guidelines changing. So English is not their first language. Now it's not 19, it's 18 years of age or older. Canadian level benchmark at 6. I'll speak to that. Canadian,
Sandra, if you can hear me now.
You're still a little shoddy, but you could give it a bit. Try again about the class sizes and stuff, Bruce.
Okay. We weren't terrible about the benchmark 6, and so it was like here, proof was not required, so it's kind of like a conversation with the student, and we'd say, "Oh yeah, close enough." There is one lesson that is a bullying, harassment, and some of the protection that students have or employees have through the Ontario government. So
I'm sorry,
lesson,
the interpreter is having a very hard time hearing.
Hearing you, Bruce. Yeah,
just making sense of what's being said.
Yeah.
It's better for
Okay.
you to just talk then, Sarah.
Okay, so what Bruce was saying is there was a very important topic about bullying, speaking up for yourself and all that kind of stuff. Like they really worked on crucial soft skills that would help people be successful when moving on to employment. So that was really good. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. I'm just trying to be cognizant of time too. So here are the targets and the class sizes that someone asked about. We started fairly small just because we were dipping our toe in. And I should also add, I don't know if there's other college LBS or academic upgrading providers out there, but because we're part of a larger organization, we might have got the funding started approval in March, but to get the hiring and the course codes and everything, that took a little longer. So unlike smaller organizations where you can get the hiring and everything done kind of within a month or so, unfortunately in the larger organizations, so we might have more resources to pull from, it takes us longer to get things going. So in Coburg, we were hoping for 10 learners, in Peterborough 15. We accepted referrals from all agencies. We did a kind of a blast for social media and reaching out to see who would benefit from this program. We did register all the all the learners as academic upgrading learners. So they got Fleming IDs and emails, which played really well if they wanted to roll in and were able to roll in then to academic upgrading to move towards post-secondary. And they each met with one of our awesome student advisors. I know one of them is on here with us today, Keelan Stutchke, and Heather Sherwin worked really hard with meeting with each of the students and helping them get enrolled. Also a throw out to Kathy Dawson, who assisted in Peterborough too. So our current enrollment was a little not as fulsome as we wanted. Coburg, we only got 4, Peterborough 12, but you know what? I think still it was very successful. We learned a lot. The faculty learned a lot, and that really allowed them to refine this material that we can then share and hopefully deliver again. Flip it. This is where I really wanted Bruce to be able to speak to, but we are developing some success stories. But in terms of student participation, again, sometimes things got in the way, as someone spoke up before about consistent participation, family things. Also things like snow days influenced us. So things like that very much influence student participation. But once they were in class, they weren't engaged. They were there to learn. I know Tracy and Sarah both and Bruce have all talked about what a joy it was to be in those classes. So that's great. Lessons learned, from my point of view, one of them is more promotion of outreach so we can get those numbers up and going. Another lessons learned would be to really look at the time that we need to offer everything. We try to fit a lot into a very short period of time. So being aware of that, can some people actually do homework to get ready for the next? Also, being very cognizant of delivery styles and how you look at the content of examples to make them relevant for all learners. I really wish Bruce could speak because this is really his stuff. I'm speaking third party out. Success story. We've had some people who have done really, really well. Bruce, do you have a moment? If you have a moment, you could type in the quick short stuff about a success, some key points of one of the success stories that you had, which would be fantastic. And I think next one would be questions. If you have any questions, next slide, if you have any questions, you can send them to me and I can more than happily forward them to Bruce or one of the other faculty to answer. That's fast and furious for us. I can hear someone whispering. I don't know if they're whispering to me or that they just unmuted.
Thanks, Sandra. And Bruce, I'm sorry about your connectivity. So we are running short of time. We have one more presentation by Robin Cook Ritchie, and Robin coordinates the literacy and basic skills and language instruction for newcomers to Canada programs at the Grand Erie District School Board. He is also the executive director at Lobop Literacy Ontario. Robin's consulting company, RCR Consulting, has focused on adult literacy for the past 2 decades, working with literacy organizations across the province on research and development projects and practitioner training. So, Robin.
Okay, thanks, Heather. I will keep this extraordinarily short and sweet in the time. I'll just preface this by saying I put 2 links into the chat. One of the links is actually a website that Laubach Literacy Ontario, which I'm the executive director of, put together, and it's a collection of resources that LBS practitioners might want to access if they're working ESL clients, and we've been adding to that for the last year or so. I also put a link in the chat about a companion book called Laubach Way to English. Sue Damon, in her first presentation, mentioned that they are using that as one of their resources. There's actually a companion teacher's manual for that series that gives you the support to use that series with English language learners. Okay, so I'm going to flip to my other hat now, which is the manager of the adult LBS program and the adult English language classes program at the Grand Erie District School Board. I have the, I guess, luxury of running all of these programs. So at the school board, we have literacy and basic skills, and we have LINK funding, and we have ESL funding to support English language learners. And we're also a CLARS center, and CLARS is the assessment process that people go through before they access funded language learning through LINK or ESL in the province. So much like some of the other programs that we've heard from this afternoon, we were faced with an influx of newcomers in our area. Our program is in Brantford. We're very close to Hamilton. That's one of the main entry points for a lot of newcomers. And in 2022, we saw a large influx of newcomers from the Ukraine, and right now we're seeing a large influx of newcomers from Afghanistan. We had kind of three main groups kind of surfaced through all of this. We had clients that were assessed for ESL or language learning, and we're on the wait list for service because our program can only has so many seats or spots available physically, literally, for learners. We also had people who were unable to access that type of funded service due to their schedules. It might have been because they were working or other obligations. And as we progressed through doing this, we found, I say our third target audience is the bring a friend audience, because as we were offering service, what we often found would be people would bring their friends to class. And so our classes grew exponentially because of that. So essentially what I did is I leveraged LBS or literacy and basic skills funding to be able to fill some of these gaps that we were seeing in our community so that learners would not have to wait for service for months and months and months, or would actually have some access to service if they couldn't attend full-time English language programming. So we called it Get Set for ESL. We have a whole bunch of targeted training series that we offer in literacy that we are the Get Set programs. So this particular program was really meant to support people who were going to actually transition usually into the ESL program when a spot opened up. So a few things about it. I'll just say that when we first launched it, and we were able to commandeer some space actually at the ESL program. What that did was make it very easy for people to transition into the funded ESL language learning programs as soon as a spot opened up for them. For the groups that weren't necessarily going to transition into that program, we offered them on-site at our LBS program because we're co-located with employment services, and we were able to facilitate referrals very easily that way for those clients. So I'm going to maybe just say next slide. I'm going to try to do this as fast as I can, Heather. Challenges we experienced when doing this, and we've been doing this now since 2022, ongoing for the most part. Learning curve for our LBS staff. Many people have spoken about this today, but it is different to teach English language learners. I am fortunate that one of my LBS staff on her own actually got her TESOL certification over the last few years because she was interested in doing that. Another challenge we did encounter at the very beginning when we were offering service at the same site as English language classes was distrust from the staff. They were worried that we were stealing clients, which is funny because we're all kind of one big program. But when they understood that those clients would transition into English language training as soon as the spot opened up, that we were able to kind of dispel that. The other challenge was capacity. There were just so many people, and that kind of goes back to the bring a friend. I wouldn't call it a problem, but situation where people were constantly bringing their friends and asking if they could also join. One of the things that was great for the LBS instructors and that they were surprised by, I knew it would happen, was the easier than expected attendance. What they found is that the clients were super motivated and wanted to be there. And next slide. So one of the, when we initially started this, what I would say to anybody who's looking at trying to do introduce this type of service in their community because there is an established need is just go ahead and do it, try it. Communicating is very key amongst all the stakeholders, especially if there's other organizations in town providing service. So I think you have to make sure if you're going to do it, the service is needed and that people, shouldn't be referred somewhere else. The other thing I would recommend if you're just starting out in doing something like this is to run it as a pilot. And I say this outside of the Skills for Success pilots. We didn't do this through Skills for Success. We did it through regular funding. But when we launched it as a pilot, which helped manage the expectations of everybody participating. So anybody who was coming to the program knew it was a pilot. And that allowed us to kind of work through whatever came up and make some decisions around whether or not we were going to continue it without having people expect that we would continue it. And that's all I have.
Thanks, Robin. That brings us to the end of our presentation, and it takes us right to a couple minutes past 3:30. So I thank everybody for staying on. I thank our interpreters for hanging around too. If you want, we can try to answer some of the questions that might not have been addressed in the chat. If you have a question, please do raise your hand and we can call on you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Yeah. So if there are any questions, please let us know by raising your hand. This will be available as a recording in the next week or so, and you will be sent an email with that link. So if you want to watch again or revisit some of the information, you'll be able to do that then. I'm not seeing any questions. Did most of them get answered in the chat?
There is one question for me, Heather, and it was, so the Get Set for ESL curriculum is available somewhere. The answer to that is no, it's not a set curriculum. We just did it like our targeted training, which do have set curriculum. What essentially the instructor does is focuses on speaking and listening, and they access a lot of the resources on the website that I shared with in the chat earlier, and just create it evolves over time. And it depends on what the needs of needs of the learners are in each group that they're working with.
Okay. Thanks, Robin. All right, just a reminder too that Stacy will have put a link in the chat to the assessment. Please take the time to answer our survey questions. It's a short survey, and it will help us to make changes to our webinars in future, so that we're always improving and meeting your needs. If I've missed your question, or if it hasn't been answered, please do put your hand up and draw attention to it. Also, if anybody has a question that they want one of the presenters to answer and they didn't get the chance to broach that question, feel free to send me an email. I'm just putting my email in the chat, and I will direct it to them on your behalf. I don't see any hands up. So again, I'll thank you all for taking the time out of your day to attend this webinar. I hope you've got something out of it that will help you in your future LBS programming. So thank you very much.